Before we begin, inshallah, if you can kindly recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for all of the marhumin of those here present, the marhumin of the hosts of this beautiful majalis that we've been having for the last 7-8 days, for all of the marhumin who are no longer with us that otherwise would have loved to have been in these majalis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, for all of our shuhada, for all of our ulama al-kiram, and for all of the marhumin from the mu'mineen and mu'minat from across the world. Rahimallahu man qara'a Surah Al-Fatiha. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين إياك نستعين And for all of those who are sick, if you can kindly recite the salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين المذلومين، واللعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا لثارات الحسين، يا حجة الله، يا ابن الحسن، يا صاحب الأسر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. My dearest elders, brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Before I first arrived in Karachi back in Shahr Ramadan, which was my first ever trip to this lovely city, not quite yet home, but we're getting there, I think. My dear hosts were very, very clear. When you get off the plane, it's going to be a tricky time. They're going to spot that you're a foreigner from far off. They're going to see your London Heathrow tags on your suitcase. They're going to be licking their lips at the fact you don't speak a word of Urdu and that your visa still needs approval. Like, this is like, you know, easy pickings for them now. So they said, when you come off, make sure you have this vaccination card ready. Make sure you do that fast pass, I think it's called. Fast track, there we go. There's so many now, I lose track of them. You need to have this ready, this ready, this ready. And then you get to the front eventually off this queue. And then they're like, oh, you don't speak Urdu. And then the fun begins. Question after question after question after question. And you're like, even though I was prepared, I wasn't prepared enough for what was then to come. And it only made sense that given that I was visiting a new country for the first time, not speaking the local language, when people who are in the know then tell me, look, Sadiq, it's going to be a bit of a tricky time when you first get in, here's a few instructions for you to make sure you prepare. In life, whenever we travel to a new destination, it is normal, it makes sense to ensure we go with a degree of preparation. If you're going to then stay in a hotel, you're then like, okay, what kind of facilities do they have? Is there halal food there? Do they serve alcohol? Well, how does it all work? What kind of bedrooms do they have? So on and so on. You prepare. Why? Because we know we're going to be there for a good period of time. And it would be foolish not to be aware of the surroundings. If going into the city is of utmost importance to you, you're not going to go and stay somewhere that's 3 hours from that very city. It loses its purpose. So you do your investigation based on somewhere that you want to visit. Similarly, every single person in this life, regardless of their faith, knows that they will die. And that there will be a time where that soul, or whatever they call it, leaves from their body. And some people say that's the end of it, others say that's the beginning of it. We are of the opinion that that's kind of the continuation of a very, very special journey. But for us, sometimes we jump a little bit and we say, okay, Allah has created us. He then brings us to life into this earth. We then live our 10, 20, 30, 80, 90, 100 years. We then pop off, and then suddenly it's Yawm al-Qiyamah, and then it's eternity. But there is a gap that sometimes we jump through. And I don't know whether it's out of ignorance or slightly deliberate, because sometimes the descriptions of this phase can be a little bit scary. And this phase that we're specifically talking about is from the moment that you depart from this world, as we would call it, and we'll be more precise shortly. When you depart from this world and the messages of Inna Lillahi wa Inna Ilayhi Raji'un, Sadiq Damani has passed away in Karachi, he didn't make it back to London, may Allah protect us all, but if it's time to be, it's time to be. From that moment until we are resurrected, this entire period is known as Barzakh, where our hotel room is our grave. That's our new surroundings. That's our new duplex suite, president suite, or maybe not so much of a suite. Maybe a little bit more sour, maybe a little bit more warm, and maybe more like an oven. Given that we know we're going to spend time in Barzakh, it's probably worthwhile checking out the facilities, what options are available, and maybe how we can go and find a half-decent coupon to make sure we get a good price and a good stay. So, inshallah, today we're going to look at initially the debriefing that takes place in the grave once we enter. We're going to look at 3 sources of relief, perhaps those coupons. And finally, we'll understand what do the righteous individuals get up to whilst they're going through Barzakh, because the journey is very different for those who are with Allah and those who are absent in terms of their nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, this is from the works of His Eminence Ayatollah Sayyid Fadil al-Milani. So if you'd like to go on this journey together, not quite to Barzakh yet, I hope. If any of us pop off, then at least you've been a bit prepared. But if you'd like to go on this journey together to understand the concept of Barzakh, kindly offer a salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And if I can, as always, just ask for the brothers who've just come in, if you can come in front of the camera, the brothers in front of the camera, if you can make space for our brothers to join us in front. Similarly, and the sisters, please try and move as far forward, but please, in front of the camera if we can. Rahimallahu man qa'im min ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So as we mentioned, Barzakh refers to this intervening period of life between this world and the hereafter, the one that is still to come. Between the burial of our body and the day it's resurrected and Allah brings it back to life again. To be precise, to understand the dynamic as to what's happening when an individual passes away or leaves this world. When we're born, we're composed of 3 elements. Our body, i.e. this flesh, the spirit, and the soul. And we're not going to go into the Arabic words for those because it gets into a very, very deep, interesting discussion, but I've been told I need to stick to time today, so I'm going to do my absolute best. The body, the spirit, the soul. It's the unity and the cooperation of these 3 different elements that allow us to live our life for however long Allah deems it to be. And when the angel of death comes and says, time up, sorry, it's our spirit that gets taken, our body is put into a grave, and our soul is left to fly free. Thus, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considers our second life, the next life that we then transition into, to be the continued existence, not of our body, not of our spirit, but of our soul. And hence the duty to look after this soul of ours, because that is what travels with us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah 23, verse 99, حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَ أَحَدَهُمُ الْمَوْتِ قَالَ رَبِّرْ جَعُونَ. When death approaches any of them, they cry, my Lord, let me go back. And we really pray we're not amongst those who panic and say, let me go back. We hope we're those who have prepared for the next life. Why do they ask to go back? The next verse then continues, so I may do good in what I left behind. Never. It is only a useless appeal they make. And there is a barrier behind them until the day they are resurrected. That barrier in Quran, in this line, وَرَائِهِمْ بَرْزَخٌ إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. It's clear that this is referred to as Barzakh. This barrier saying, look, your time here is up. Full-time whistle gone. We're now waiting for the trophy day. Barzakh is the barrier that stops you from going back into the previous life. And in reference to this ayah, our holy sixth Imam, Imam Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He's reported to say, my only fear is what might happen to you during your stay in Barzakh. And it's said that the Imam was referring to the length of time that people remain burdened by reflections of the negative attitudes that they held during their temporary lives. Namely, and you won't be surprised with some of these because we've discussed them in the last few days, neglecting their religious duties, greed, jealousy, insults, backbiting, misjudgment, slander, and other sins that we shouldn't be committing in this life. We're told that the Holy Prophet was sat at the grave of a man by the name of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, and his mother was overjoyed that the Prophet of Allah had come to be by the graveside of this man. But the Prophet's reported to say to her, do not be so hasty, for in his grave your son will have to take account for his mistreatment of his wife. It is sad that in so many communities across the world that we still have this challenge of mistreatment of wives. Do not be so hasty, for in his grave your son will have to account for his mistreatment of his wife. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam reported to say, the grave is either a garden that mirrors paradise, or a hole that accesses the fires of hell. It's one of two. Either the aircon is on and it's a nice 22 degrees, or it's burning up in there. And your remote control is with you right now. You can decide the temperature of your barzakh now. But once you enter the room, you're locked in. No more AC control. In several hadith, we're told that the first thing to occur after the burial of a believer, of someone, is the arrival of two angels asking what the deceased's faith is. Many of us hear this, we've been told this, that Munkar and Nakir is then usually known as, will enter the grave and have a bit of a discussion with the man or woman who has now transitioned. One of our great scholars, Shaykh al-Sadiq, is reported to say, our belief concerning being questioning in the grave is that it is absolutely true, and that there is no way to escape from it happening. Those who answer in the appropriate manner will find comfort. They'll have a pleasing fragrance wafted through their graves, and in the life that is to come will find themselves in the garden of delight. Happy days. What did it take in order to get there? Just don't give in to your lowly desires. Let your intellect rule and go to Allah. It's so simple. On the other hand, Shaykh Sadiq writes, those who do not answer in the appropriate manner will be forced to drink boiling water in their graves and will be roasted upon the fires of hell in the world that is to come. No rational or intellectual human being, if you gave them the choice to say, look, tomorrow is Saturday. Depending on how you do in terms of your deeds on Saturday, if you can refrain from this, that and the other, and if you can do this, that and the other, then on Sunday you'll be rewarded. Every intellectual individual will be like, yeah, easy. One day, that's all it takes. Just focus and I'll get the reward. Easy investment, right? The maths is even more compelling when it comes to the akhirah. Why? Because this life is a max of 100 times by 365 days. And eternity tends to infinity. So the percentage is negligible, in fact. Why is it that we're so quick to give up this life when we know that the next is eternal? Only an unintellectual individual would do so. I.e. an individual who, as we said, lets their lower desires conquer their intellect. We have an example of someone who, as we like to say in colloquial English, smashed it. And it's a lady by the name of Fatima bint Asad, the dear mother of Asadullah al-Ghalib, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi afdal as-salati was-salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And it's a really moving and fascinating narration, actually, I found. It's said, and it's quite lengthy, so I've tried to shorten it a little bit, that after her ghusl, she was shrouded and carried into her final resting place. The Holy Prophet would lay her down into her grave, but prior to layering her into it, would do something very interesting. He'd whisper into her ear for a considerable time. The Holy Prophet, before lowering her into the grave, would get into the grave initially, then come out and then whisper something into her ear for a considerable amount of time, during which he was overheard to repeat the words, "My son, my son." Why is the Holy Prophet saying to Fatima bint Asad, "My son, my son"? What has this got to do with anything? After leaving the grave, he leveled the earth over her and bowed before where he had left her. People then heard him say, "There is no deity other than Allah. O Allah, I commit her into your care." The companions asked, "O Messenger of Allah, we saw you doing something that we've never seen you do before." He replied, "I have today lost the tender-hearted benevolence of Abu Talib." And if we just pause here to say, for those who still consider Abu Talib to not be a believer, this is a very challenging statement that they'll have to try and recover on one day. "I've lost today the tender-hearted benevolence of Abu Talib. His wife Fatima bint Asad used to favor me over herself and her own children. One day, whilst I was talking about the day of resurrection and saying that people are to be raised bare, she said how humiliating and embarrassing to have one's body exposed before all. So I assured her that Allah will resurrect her fully clothed. I then mentioned the constricting and confining nature of the graves, to which she said how fearfully claustrophobic that will be. I assured her then that Allah will grant her comfort. After I shrouded her, the angels asked her who her Lord is, and she replied, "My Lord is Allah." When they asked her who her prophet was, she replied, "Muhammad." And when asked who her imam was, she paused. And that is when I told her to say, "My son, my son." Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Ali ibn Abi Talib. "Who is your imam, O Fatima?" My son Ali ibn Abi Talib." The two angels departed from her, saying, "Sleep with the gratification of a bride in her inner apartment." She smashed it. Test done. Good. But we know, my dear brothers and sisters, that if our physical body is not coming with us, then it can't just be our intellect that comprehends the answers to these questions. It can't just be that we've memorized them like we memorize our times tables. It needs to be something that is truly within our soul. That when we're asked who your Lord is, yes, my brain says, my revision told me Allah, but my soul's practice tells me forget Allah, focus on your lowly desires. My answer will not be Allah, my answer will be my lowly desire. My soul needs to be convicted in these answers. Yes, Allah, you are my Lord, and I ensured in all my decisions I put you first. Who is your prophet? Yes, I recognize that it was the Prophet Muhammad and the Sharia that he brought down. I tried to follow it with the utmost precision. Who is your imams? And we'll list them from 1 to 12, and I've been living to set up the revolution of our awaited Savior. Our soul needs to be convicted. We know that this is a haqq. Al-mawtu haqq. You've all been there, I'm sure, at these funerals. Ifham, listen, understand. Ya Fulan ibn Fulan. It's going to be our name soon. And for those of you who have shaken that body at that time where they say ifham, you can feel that weight where you're like, please man, I beg you, wake up and listen to these words. But the reality is it may be too late at that point. It may be too late. Barzakh is a haqq. The questions are haqq. Munkar and nakir haqq. We hear it in the du'as over and over and over again. but we're not training our souls to get there. We know it, but we're not practicing it. Our souls are not being trained to get there. If we get there, we fly like Fatima bint Asad. And if we don't, then it's like the AC remote has been left behind. Now there is some salvation for us, because perhaps we're panicking a little bit. And to be honest, the idea of tonight's session was, after doing a few practical lectures, I wanted to maybe wake myself up first and be like, okay, I like the practical social environment, but actually let me remind myself that al-mawtu haqq, and maybe this reminder is beneficial for others as well. So maybe we're feeling a little bit frightened, and that is the objective, is to wake us up a little bit. We're told to regularly visit the graveyard for this reason, to go and remind ourselves this is an inevitable journey for us, and a beautiful journey if we prepare accordingly. But there are three things that Sayyid Fadl tells us that we can do in order to seek relief from this challenge in Barzakh, from the torment in Barzakh. And actually, some of these are things that this community does beautifully well, phenomenally well, and inshallah may all of the efforts be accepted. And if you would like to understand these three hopeful sources of relief for us as we enter our Barzakh, kindly offer salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first one that I'm sure many of you know is known as Sadaqah of Jariyah. The source is known as Sadaqah al-Jariyah, i.e. Sadaqah which is continuing to flow like a stream. Projects where public benefit continues after your demise. And I've seen it here, and I've had the opportunity of visiting some of these amazing institutions that you have founded, and may Allah accept them and grant you more tawfiq to continue investing in them even more and more and more. Schools, centers of education, orphanages, long-term public benefit projects, be they wells, be they food rations, whatever it is, be they employment for those that otherwise don't have that leg up in society and you're able to provide it. In fact, it used to be a custom in Muslim countries to instill water fountains to provide those who were going through certain roads where maybe there may not be that kind of civilization, to ensure they can have clean water available to them. And this, we see it on charity shows all the time, build a well in this country, build a well in that country, and these are beautiful examples. Hence, anyone that establishes a virtuous custom like this will be rewarded. And in addition to being rewarded for those actions of anyone that goes and interacts with that thing that they've set up. It's beautiful. This is why it's something that can be massively in your favor. Now, there's a catch. Because in the same way the logic works that if you set up something that continues after your death and adds value to society, qurbatan ilallah, that you'll benefit, if you have set up an institution or a gathering or a concept that takes people away from Allah, and you've now passed away, but that gathering or that concept continues, then for every person that takes part in it, you'll also receive the punishment of that. Oh, but I only attended the wedding. Yeah, but by going, you maybe showed that it's acceptable to your family members. Oh, but I only just built this venue, you know, it can be used for anything. No. You need to stipulate what it can and can't be used for. You need to stipulate the Sharia guidelines. Otherwise, that could work against you. We need to be mighty careful, my dear brothers and sisters. It can work in our favor, but also it can work like a stream, a downstream that drowns us eventually. The second one that is of huge importance is leaving knowledge on the earth for future generations to benefit from. And some beautiful examples include Allama Amini in support of the authenticity of Yawm al-Ghadir, the Eid al-Akbar, the greatest Eid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He compiled 11 volumes in the beautiful encyclopedia, if you could call it, Al-Ghadir fi al-Kitab wa Sunnah, where he goes into history and pulls out all of these different narrations from all schools of thought, validating the concept of Ghadir. 11 volumes of work, taking 60 years worth of research. 60 years worth of painstaking research throughout the Middle East, copying even by hand manuscripts that he managed to uncover that was super rare. One of which, in fact, was in the possession of one of the merchants in the holy shrines of Kadhimiyya. And after seeking the salam and intercession of the Imamain, he managed to gain access to this very, 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 very rare manuscript with this merchant. And you can now find this in the public library of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen in the holy city of Najaf. Something very interesting there to note is the amount of painstaking effort these ulama go through to provide us our ilm. Over 60 years of research on one topic. We said in one of the nights, go and seek the correct knowledge. Don't go and seek what you want to find. There's a big difference. Google now is amazing. If you want to find an answer that appeases you, you'll find it. You'll find some random chat room that existed from many years ago, or a new chat room that now exists that someone suggested an answer that you prefer. It doesn't work that way. Go and find the one who is most skilled and knowledgeable in this field. And in the same way, one thing that people say to me is like, oh, but I don't know how I'm going to find the right marja, because I don't know the field. Okay, if God forbid you had a major heart problem, how would you go find the best cardiologist? You'd have an initial circle of friends who may be your doctors. You'd ask them, hey, I've got a cardiology issue. Who should I go speak to? They may refer you to a group of cardiologists. Perhaps the same name comes up from each four of them. They all mention the same, or three of them mention the same name. Okay, fine, you go to them. Who do you guys recommend? And you'll see the same sort of one or two names come up. One of those names, when it comes to the marja'iyya, is His Eminence Sayyid Ali al-Sistani. May Allah preserve all of our maraja'. When Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani is telling you this guidance, and he's generally seen by the majority of the Shia world, and even the non-Shia world, as a trusting, smart scholar, why would you go against his word and take the risk based on a few years of research elsewhere? Unless you've seen direct challenge of the evidence that he's provided. But this is for another day. The main point I'm trying to get at is our maraja, our scholars have painstakingly spent their time giving all of this knowledge, and sometimes we're so quick to reject it when it doesn't say what we want it to say. One of those gents, one of those legends, is His Eminence Allama Majlisi. 110 volumes of Bihar al-Anwar. 110 volumes. I can't even write 110 pages on faith, let alone 110 pages just on comprehensively covering traditions associated to the Ma'sumin alayhim wassalam, covering every single angle of Islamic teaching. Imagine, all of these lectures that we do regularly will refer to Allama Majlisi's Bihar al-Anwar, who refers to other sources. His compilation, the amount of thawab that he receives in his qabr, inshallah, is massive. We then have 29 volumes compiled by Shaykh Agha Buzruk Tehrani, who compiled a bibliography of Shia sources and Shia personalities. And then Sayyid Muhsin al-Amin then comes with 56 volumes. Huge learnings in generations to come. So my recommendation to this dear community, if we don't have the knowledge from amongst us, firstly send some of our budding youth to go and get that knowledge. We're told in Quran from amongst you to send some of them across to go and study. Let's ensure we're sending one or two of our young, bright individuals to go to the seminaries and to perhaps bring back this gems of knowledge, and even write down these gems of knowledge on behalf of this community so that we can all benefit. Maybe you've sponsored part of their studies to go. Imagine the thawab jariyah that you then benefit from if you sponsored Allama Majlisi. And if we can't do that, then I recommend you a second thing. You can see from these sessions that we have had that the English language seems to be reaching the intellect and the souls of our community members, both young and old. Alhamdulillah, we have so many resources available in Urdu thanks to the history behind the Urdu language in association with the Shia faith. We're building in English, but go and give money and donate and help. Use your business acumen to get these English books published en masse. And inshallah, this can also be a source of relief when we're in Barzakh. The final source of relief that Sayyid Fadl gives us is our children. There are many reasons to advise my dear younger brothers and sisters to get married. And we can speak about that, and we have spoken about that a few times in our sessions. But one of them is children. Children, being a father, being a mother is the toughest job on earth. I think all of the businessmen here would agree with me that it's the toughest job on earth. But it's the most rewarding job on earth. And it can reward you even more so once you're in that qabr. And everyone forgets to come and see you. Those best friends, they forget to come and see you. Even maybe that student that you sponsored, maybe even he or she forgets to come to see you. But you just hope and pray that your child will never stop coming to see you. How can a child contribute to being a source of relief for their parents whilst they are in Barzakh? Firstly, their behavior towards others. If it's polite, it reflects very well on the parents, that these beautiful parents have brought up this child in a fantastic way. And it stays in the memory of the person that's met them. And perhaps when that individual says, you know what a lovely individual, their parents must have done a good job, perhaps the parents at that point will receive some barakah, because that is a source of their teaching on this earth that still lasts. The second is that the Quran mentions that people should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless and be merciful to their deceased parents. It's in Quran, in a very famous line. And it's very interesting. We'll look at the translation in the second. We'll just recite the Arabic. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. The verse starts by saying, for your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him. Look at the importance of that. In terms of our faith, for your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him. That is similar to the Shahada. Worship none but Him. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no Lord, no deity except Allah. You would imagine whatever comes next in this verse must be of crazy importance. What comes next? And honor your parents. If one or both of them reach old age in your care, never say to them even uff, nor yell at them. Rather, address them respectfully. It continues, وَأَخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. And be humble with them out of mercy, and pray, my Lord, be merciful to them as they were raised me when I was young. And we're instructed, or recommended I should say, to recite this beautiful dua in our qunut. رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Just this can give some hope and salvation to your parents in their qabr. And I always found this interesting, that when we were growing up, and I remember so clearly, I was 5, 6 or 7, there was myself, my older brother, and then my 2 cousins who were like brothers, older brothers to me as well. I was the youngest. And my father had sourced this Quran teacher from Iraq that had moved to London. And he was teaching at the local madrasa. My dad was like, do you want to come teach our kids? So I think my uncle, one of the 2, and he accepted. And then for like 10 years, he taught us Quran every Sunday. Every Sunday. And he was one of those guys where you knew he was beaming with knowledge. But as a kid, you never really respected him for the level that he had. At least I didn't, because I was a kid. And it was only until maybe about when I was 18 or 19 and I went to Iraq for the first time, and he found out that I was coming. He was like, come. He lives in Kufa. He was like, come. I go to his house, and then eventually he takes me to one of his teachers' houses, and eventually we realized just what a scholar this man was. And he was wasting his time on me as a kid trying to teach a British kid Quran. The humility of this man. Even now when we go back to Iraq, we go and see him, anything we need, he's there for us in Kufa. Phenomenal man. Such that we'd be reciting Quran and you do something beautiful. And you know, it's just these small symbols that they do to almost illustrate to you, look, hifz is important, remembrance of Quran is important. I'll be finishing the page, and as I would turn it, he'd put his hand on my hand as I turn the page, and he'd recite for a couple of minutes, and then you turn the page and he knows the next lines. Illustrating to me, look, you need to learn this Quran. Phenomenal man. Anyway, I digress. Why do I mention him? I mention him because as a kid, I'd constantly like run away from my Quran lessons. I hid in the closet. I remember one time that there was like a school trip over the weekend and I legged it down the street, and my mom was like, if you don't come back, you're not going on the school trip. So guess what? Came right back, did my Quran lesson. And this man bore with me. And when I was a little bit older, I said to my mom, like, why were you so insistent on us reciting Quran? Was it so that we can recite in public? Was it? And she was like, no. Sadiq is very clear. When I die, I need someone to recite Surah Yasin for me. Okay, clear objective. The salvation that a child can bring for their parents in that qabr is second to none. Second to none. After a parent passes away, another way that a child can appreciate them is to ensure that all of their daily prayers are performed. Now, Sayyid Fadil mentions that whilst many of us may just pay someone off to do it, it's way better for us to perform them for our parents ourselves. And I know that's easier said than done, depending on how many they've racked up. But that's just something to keep in mind as to how the child can give some source of relief to their parents once they've left this world. We also have another concept that comes up, and this is narrated from the Holy Prophet, where he talks about Nabi Isa alayhi salam, and he's reported to say, when Isa, son of Maryam, once passed a certain grave, he became aware that its occupant was being subjected to severe punishment. Then Nabi Isa alayhi salam passed this grave some 12 months later, and he learned that the punishment had stopped. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala why this was so, he learned that the punishment had ended when the pious son of the deceased attained the age of maturity and thereafter took care of an orphan and undertook the repair of a public footpath. So even what we learn from here is that if a parent is training their child in the right way, such that when they pass away and they're going through major torment, if that child is pious and goes about doing the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth in a sincere manner, even that can still contribute to salvation for the parent in their qabr. Which comes back to the point we mentioned a few nights ago. Our next generation, the youth, they need to be nurtured correctly. They are our salvation, not just for the revolution of Ali Muhammad of Al-Qa'im, but also for our own selves in our qabr. But if we're not nurturing them with due attention, we only have ourselves to blame. We lose an opportunity, we lose this source of salvation in this very difficult time in Barzakh, unless we're amongst the righteous. And for those of you who are righteous, you can sit right up now because the good news is coming. And for those of you who wish to attain this level of righteousness so you can sit up and relax a little bit more, kindly offer a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the righteous, it's really not bad news. It's actually like first class plus more on Emirates. It's quite good actually. We're told that the companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen by the name of Habba al-Urani narrates that one day at around noon, he accompanied the Imam to the very famous cemetery in Najaf known as Wadi as-Salam, the Valley of Peace. And it appeared to this companion that the Imam was talking to someone. Al-Urani then reports, I stood next to the Imam until I was exhausted and obliged to sit down. As, however, the Imam continued to stand and continue conversing, he placed a cloak on the earth and invited the Imam to sit with him. But he said, "Oh Habba, I am enjoying conversation with my fellow believers." When I asked to whom he was referring to, he said, "They are holding a friendly assembly in Barzakh and enjoying each other's company and conversations. The souls of all the believers who die in every corner of the world assembled together here in Wadi as-Salam." Chilling, you're going to Najaf all the time. What a happy time. Abu Basir goes on and narrates that Imam Sadiq is reported to say during their time in Barzakh, the believers' souls will be in the chambers of paradise, enjoying food and drink in each other's company. It's like those late night iftars that we had in Shahr Ramadan. Imagine that just ongoing. It's clear, it's so clear to us that if we are to become sincere muttaqis, sincere believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we fly like Fatima bint Asad. And that is our focus. It is the happiest, the best, the most successful way to live this life that Allah has created for us. And all it takes for us is to recognize the greatness of Allah and to prioritize His command over our lower desires, i.e. destroying our ego. The moment we submit, everything else falls into place. And then we fly, then we've got nothing to fear. But remember, in moderation, we said yesterday, it's not that we have nothing to fear. Allah is always there. Khawf and raja, 2 wings. We never want to become complacent. But if we're focused, we can fly, and Barzakh will be an enjoyable experience for us. We don't always need to see death as this horrible, scary, oh my God, they're gonna get, but no, if you've got a sincere individual, they're flying, no worries. But if we deep down know as individuals that we're so far away from that, then at least these majalis give us the opportunity to turn it around. Because as we said on night 1, maybe you've done something, or maybe you haven't done something, it's just the blessing of Allah, that you've been yet again invited personally to the majlis of Abu Abdullah. Yes, beat your chest. Yes, cry for Hussein. But if the beating of the chest and the crying of Hussein does not enable you to get on the ship of salvation, the boat will leave, you'll be left behind. They'll have the AC in Barzakh, and you'll be lacking the remote. Yes, we can rely on our children, but I'm not sure that's going to be sufficient, because at some point, as we know, as we say in Munajat Amir al-Mu'mineen, cited from the Quran, there's going to be a day when no one cares about you. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفُ وَلَا بَنُونَ. I think I may have got the Arabic wrong. Mothers are going to run from their kids, fathers are going to run from their kids, brothers will run from their sisters, husbands will run from their spouse. It's each to themselves. So don't rely on that. Rely on what you can control. And just to end on that, I had a very interesting call from my boss just before the lecture actually. And he said, oh, I've read this book on Amazon and it's basically saying how Amazon work and whatever. And he was like, we've been focusing so much on outputs and not enough on inputs. Our business, we just measure outputs, but outputs, the deed is done. Why are we not measuring enough on inputs? And I was like, you know what, it's a similar thing, right? If we focus on the inputs, if we can focus on what we can control right now, the output will take care of itself. So make the change. بحق الحسين عليه السلام. You see, when we're asked about death, many of us panic. Many of us get nervous. But there's a young individual in Karbala who has a beautiful statement when he, according to some narrations, is asked about death. We lack that yaqeen, we lack that conviction. Yet this young man comes back with a line that we could only wish of saying. He's reported to say, death is sweeter than honey. That can only be someone trained by the Ahl al-Bayt, none other than Kareem Ahl al-Bayt, the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. In his honor, as-salawat for Imam al-Hasan al-Mujtaba. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Qasim got it. Like Fatima bint Asad, Qasim got it. He was flying. And he will fly and remain to do so, and I'm sure he's, as we said, chilling in Wadi Salam. And the Quran says, do not reckon those who are slain in the way of Allah to be dead. No, they are alive with their Lord, receiving sustenance from Him and rejoicing in the grace that Allah has bestowed upon them. They give good news to those who have not yet joined them. History tells us that Al-Qasim alayhi salam was the son of Imam al-Hasan, and his mother was a slave maiden by the name of Narjis. And he was glowing like a radiant moon. According to Khawarizmi, at the time of his martyrdom, he had not yet reached the age of maturity. However, the author of Lubab al-Ansab reports that he was around 16 years old, maybe slightly older than many of us had thought, but this is according to one narration that he was around 16 years old. The reports about his efforts to receive permission to go to the battlefield from Imam al-Hussein indicated the level of al-Qasim's yaqeen, of his conviction, not just intellectually, but spiritually. His awareness, his courage, his foresight, his faith as a 16-year-old. And it's perhaps because of his young, tender age, the fact that he had such a long life potentially ahead of him, that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam was initially reluctant to allow him to go and fight. However, we know that al-Qasim alayhi salam persisted to such an extent that the Imam finally allowed him to go. And I do just reflect on that conversation, which I didn't manage to find much on in history. But I think we can maybe just think about it for a moment, right? If you have a brother and that brother eventually passes away, and if that brother of yours or that sibling of yours has children, you'd naturally feel a sense of parenthood towards those children, right? You'd probably tell them, listen, you're not an orphan. Don't think that way. As they say in Arabic, Beiti Beituk, my house is your house. I am your father now. I will look after you. Your wedding, I'll cover. I'll be there for you. Your exams, I'll be there to prepare you. You need anything? No problem. You're scared at night? You sleep in my bed. You are like my own. So I just wonder in that moment when Al-Qasim alayhi salam would come out from his tent and go and have this conversation with his uncle Abu Abdullah, what does this brother Hussein see when he sees his nephew Al-Qasim? Naturally you would start to have the memories of your brother Al-Hassan alayhi salam, no? And now this young prince is coming to you asking to seek martyrdom, and you're like, no, perhaps metaphorically gave a promise to your father that I'll look after you, that you are my amana. How can I let go of you? Yes, Imam al-Hussein at this point had let go of Ali al-Akbar. That was the first person of Ali Muhammad that we understand to leave, because that was Imam Hussein's jihad. But this is not strictly his son. This is his brother's son. But maybe this is why Imam al-Hassan, as we said a few nights ago, years before, would say to Imam al-Hussein, oh my brother, La yawmaka yawmaka ya Abu Abdullah, that there will be no day like your day, O Hussein. Perhaps alluding to the fact that Imam al-Hussein would be alone in the land of Karbala, that he would call into the desert, هل من ناصر ينصرنا? Is there anyone, is there any helper to help us? For this is the family of Rasulullah on the plains of Karbala. For Imam al-Hussein would look out and see that all his companions had gone fi sabilillah, and that he would take the courage and the strength, which we'll discuss tomorrow or the day after, to let go of his dear heart, Ali al-Akbar. But as this young prince would emerge, O Hussein, would you get flashbacks of your dear brother Al-Hassan? Imam Al-Hassan alayhi salam is reported to be represented by 3 individuals, by his son Qasim, by his other son known as Abu Bakr, and his other son known as Abdullah. Qasim alayhi salam was a young boy who had not yet even reached the age of puberty. When Imam al-Hussein saw him, he hugged him and cried. And then he would give him the permission to go and fight. He came out with a face as bright as the moon, holding a sword, wearing a shirt and trousers and a pair of sandals. He would say, according to historians, these lines of poetry: إن تنكروني فأنا نجن الحسن. If you do not recognize me, I am the son of Hassan. صبت النبي المصطفى والمؤتمن, the grandson of the Prophet al-Mustafa and Mu'taman. هذا حسين كالأسير المرتهن. This is Hussein, tied like a prisoner. بين أناس لا سقوا صوب المزن, among those people who may Allah deprive from his blessings. Al-Qasim alayhi salam started to fight. And for those of you who have heard of the Masa'ib of Qasim, you know what I'm about to say next. And I feel maybe this just illustrates the young, tender age of Al-Qasim in the battlefield. He starts to fight until the sandal on his left foot was cut, according to some narrations. Some say that it was already cut. But the grandson of the great Prophet, he refused to fight barefooted. So he would stop to fix his sandal, not worried about the thousands of enemies that surrounded him. Wa Hasana. As he was doing that, Umar ibn Sa'd ibn Nufayl al-Azdi would attack this young prince of Ahl al-Bayt. However, before doing so, Hamid ibn Muslim asked Umar ibn Sa'd, what do you want from this young boy? Is it not enough that there are so many who have surrounded him? Umar replied, I swear by Allah that I will attack him. He did not leave Qasim alone and eventually struck Al-Qasim's head with a sword. The boy fell down on his face calling, oh my uncle. But this isn't the line that hurts, the next line hurts. His mother was standing inside her tent and looked at Al-Qasim in shock. Like an angry lion, Imam al-Hussein rushes towards his nephew. He strikes this enemy of Allah with his sword. The enemy of Allah tried to avoid the strike by blocking it, and his arm gets severed from his body. The enemy of Allah then shouts loudly for help, and so the enemy forces mounted their horses to go and save him. But the enemy of Allah ended up falling under their feet, and the horses stamped over him, killing him. But my dear brothers and sisters, after those horses of the enemies of Allah stamped one of their own, the dust eventually settled. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was sitting with the Qasim's head in his lap, while Qasim alayhi salam would be slowly trembling with his feet in his last moments. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is reported to say, بُعْدًا لِقَوْمٍ قَتَلُوكَ خصمهم يوم القيامة جدك وأبوك. May the people who killed you be distanced from Allah's mercy. Your grandfather and your father will be their enemies on the day of judgment. The Imam reported to then continue in this line hurts. عز والله على عمك. It is difficult for your uncle أن تدعوه فلا يجيبك. It is difficult for your uncle that you called him, but he could not respond to you, or he responded but he cannot help you. It is a voice whose attackers are many, but whose supporters are only few. Imam al-Hussein then picked him up and carried him on his chest, with Qasim's feet dragging on the ground. Oh Hussein, I ask you, how do you keep your composure when you have your dear nephew on your chest, and then you walk back to the tents and you lay him next to your son Ali al-Akbar? The Imam then raised his head to the skies and he prays to Allah. Allahumma ahsihim adada wa la tughadir minhum ahada wa la taghfir lahum abada. Imam al-Hussein prays to Allah, oh Allah, count them all the enemies and do not leave any one of them and do not forgive them ever. And it's this line in Ziyarat al-Nahiyah that we have that really hurts, where our awaited Savior in the Ziyarah is reported to say, when he called out to Al-Hussein for help, referring to Al-Qasim, oh Imam Zaman, on this moment we send our love to you and we ask Allah to grant you the patience of Zainab. When he called out to Al-Hussein for help, his uncle flew to his side like an eagle, but found him convulsed, his legs squirming and twisting in the sand. Oh Qasim, oh the pain. Oh Qasim, as a young shining youth of Ahl al-Bayt, how can you be mistreated in this way? But oh Qasim, I ask you, when you were raised to the heavens with your grandfather and father, how would they look on when they would see Hussein Gharib in Karbala, who ran to Hussein's side, who would go to Hussein's side in his last moment? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين والله. With these tears rolling down our eyes, we raise our hands to you, Ya Allah, to allow us to see death sweeter than honey like Al-Qasim. We ask you, O Allah, to grant us children like Al-Qasim, who will be our thawab jariyah on this earth. O Allah, we ask you to forgive our sins, the sins of our marhumin who are in Barzakh, and allow us to be amongst those who meet in Wadi as-Salam with the Ahl al-Bayt. Matam Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya